very good morning, everyone. A very warm welcome to Mission Billion Summit. It's not that every day, it's not often that you walk into a room where the shared ambition is this clear to reach a billion lives, not just with ideas, but with outcomes that endure. Today's conversations are grounded into reality. We'll talk about what actually works, what doesn't work, and what it takes to stay the course when change is slow, complex, and deeply human. Each conversation asks us an important yet a difficult question. What is it that actually creates a never lasting change? An everlasting change. The sessions today are designed like a journey from evidence to grassroots leadership to communities to impact measurement and finally to justice at scale. A small request before we start the session is to put your phones on silent mode, as we want all our speakers to get equal attention. We'll take 10 seconds for that. Our first session is evidence that drives change. This session spotlights founders who have used data and evidence to sharpen problem definitions, shift narratives, and influence decision makers. Speakers will share how evidence helped them build credibly, surface overlooked issues, and unlock pathways to scale so you can apply these lessons in your own work. Evidence that drives change brings together four speakers that will be giving flash talks here, followed by a Q&A of 15 minutes. I would like to introduce the four speakers that will be presenting here today. First, Merlia Shaukath. Merlia Shaukath is the founder and CEO of Madhi Foundation, working with government schools to address India's foundational learning crisis. She is an alumni of Stella Maris College, Oxford University, and the London School of Economics, and a fellow of Acumen, Ashoka, and Mulago. Second, Muzamil Baig. Muzamil Baig is the co-founder of Project Deep, where he leads fundraising, government partnerships, and organizational development to strengthen and scale institutional capacity. He brings experience across the corporate sector at Godrej Properties and learning initiatives across India and Africa. Pooja Sharma Goel. Pooja Sharma Goel is the founding CEO of the Udaiti Foundation, working to close India's gender gap in the workforce. She leads the Close the Gender Gap 30 Cross 30 initiative, partnering with government and industry to increase women's formal workforce participation at scale. She is an alumni of IIT Delhi and INSEAD. Arundhati Gupta. Arundhati Gupta is the founding trustee and CEO of Mentor Together, India's largest youth mentoring non-profit. She leads a national mentoring ecosystem connecting students, mentors, institutions, and employers at scale. 50,000 plus mentees and 25,000 plus mentors have come on board their digital career mentorship platform, Mentor to Go. She is an Ashoka Fellow, a Salzburg Global Seminar Fellow, and a Brookings Echidna Global Scholar. A very warm welcome to all the four speakers. Can we have a huge round of applause for all of them? I'm sure all of you, as I am, eager to join in their discussion. So let's dive straight in. I would like to hand over the stage to these four. I would like to invite Merlia on stage. Yes, yes.
Check. Okay. Hello, everyone, and good morning. Good morning, still morning. Yes. Good morning. I'm Merlia, and very very pleased to be here. As I was coming up, I was just talking to a friend, talking because we work with the government. The existential question is, what is evidence? Is evidence to us the same? Does it mean the same to the government? And therefore, evidence comes in different shapes and sizes when you're working with the government. So a little bit about Madhi, because I think the backstory needs to be told put some of the data that you will see later in context. So, we're a nonprofit based in Chennai. We work with the government of Tamil Nadu, and we work on system reforms to improve foundational learning across grades 1 to 3. Our work reaches 37,000 schools, which is the total number of schools in Tamil Nadu, and about 2 million children. So when we started with 3 schools way back in 2016 and grew to 15 schools in about a year. That was when we were piloting. And then one fine day, we just had a very senior bureaucrat who was the principal secretary for education at that point walk into the classroom and say, you're just doing this in 15 schools in the heart of Chennai. This may not be relevant to solve the problem for the larger state. I'm going to give you 2,000 schools in the most educationally backward district in Tamil Nadu. If it works there, then we'll talk. So we were given the opportunity to work with 2,000 schools in Tiruvannamalai, which is one of the most, not one of the most educationally backward district in Tamil Nadu. And, the things were in our favor. We had evidence to show that things could, what the program design that we had could work at scale. And then COVID hit. So we had no chance to sort of pause, say that, okay, we'll go from 2000 to maybe down. This is it not clear? Okay. We didn't have an opportunity to, do too much at that point in terms of evidence gathering because as soon as COVID was receding, the government called us to the table and said, we now need to take this to 37,000 schools. No space for negotiation. When they say 37,000 schools, you say, okay. So, fortunately, it meant that, we were able to work across the state, and there's a lot of advantage that comes through state buy-in. But unfortunately, what that also means is that we didn't have enough of a counterfactual within the state. And as those really exciting graphs where control and treatment, where treatment sort of shoots up, and then you show that control has less of an effect. We unfortunately didn't have that when we had to scale to 37,000 schools. So that's when the government launched the FON mission, which is called the Marathon mission, and we had to, very very quickly put together a reimagined curriculum. It was no longer grade based for the first time, and I think, if I'm not wrong, the first state to mainstream level based teaching learning material. So it meant that at the beginning of every year, every child, every one of the 2 million children was baselined, and the books that they received were not for simply for their grade level, but actually for their learning levels in math and learning levels in language. So as you can imagine, there was just a lot of flurry around it. Had to get teachers on board, had to get assessment systems on board, and then you realize that just getting obviously the curriculum into schools wasn't sufficient. You need to train the teachers, you need to train the trainers, you need to train the officials who go into classrooms so they don't go in and ask, have you completed the syllabus, but actually ask meaningful questions. You had to set up systems that can capture data meaningfully. Believe it or not, even until that point, data was being collected on pen and paper. We didn't have an app that collected, classroom data. So we built the app for the government. We built the dashboard for the government. So, perfect story, everything done, and then you just waited for data to flow in, and then data started flowing in. Those of you who have worked with the government and relied on government data to make decisions, you want to share how reliable data can be, or a safe space, as they say. So data started flowing in, and maybe we'll take one of the metrics, right, of the many metrics that we were um, tracking. Percentage of children in grade 3 who could read a grade 2 level text. So when we started, you can imagine what that percentage stood at. Anyone wants to guess? Let's say teacher reported data, right? This is system reported, teacher reported data. Yeah, yeah, I heard the right word, number. Sorry? 90%. Yes. So, the system incentivizes in many ways inflation, right? Because you report reliable, honest data, you get pulled up. You get pulled up without the system necessarily supporting you to get better. There is a penalty, but there aren't enough support structures for you to benefit from. So you'd rather just say, hey, my children are doing well. I don't need any more support. But we were also running at that point, smaller dipstick assessments where some of our staff would go in for assessments. We had different layers of officers going in for assessment, and that painted a completely different story, right? Now, anyone who's worked with a large state with a powerful teacher community, teacher union, you have to tread carefully around such sensitive confrontation, right? And we wanted to avoid confrontation at any cost, because it wasn't that we wanted to penalize teachers. It's not that you want to upset the apple cart too early by saying, hey, none of you is giving us reliable, honest data, and therefore we're pulling you up, because then you lose the momentum. You lose. It's a very new program. You want teachers to buy into it. You want their support. So we weren't collecting data so much to penalize teachers or pull them up, but to really understand the health of the system, right? So you can design follow-up teacher training better. You can design other support structures better. But the question was, how do we even get to that point where we have reliable data? If God forbid you told the teachers that, hey, we have a external agency coming in and telling us that you guys are not giving us reliable data, you can just walk out the door, right? Um, so we had at least 6 sources of data, and maybe you can pull up the slide now. So in 2024, a couple of years ago, this is where the data stood, the story. You have Asar that said 12% of children in Tamil Nadu could read, third graders at a grade 2 level. You had teacher reported data that was the 85%. Non-teacher cadre, which is your BRCs, your BEOs, your DEOs. So every level of the education bureaucracy in Tamil Nadu is mandated to visit classrooms and sort of do a dipstick assessment. Please don't take pictures. Especially of this slide. You can take pictures of everything else. And then we did a dipstick as well. So, that was our number. And then the government actually stuck its neck out and contracted a third-party agency, Educational Initiatives, if you know, to conduct, the evaluation. And they were very, very close, if not identical. Yeah, very close to what we were seeing. But EI, our data, were summarily dismissed as there were stories that we were either trying to sabotage or that we had other hidden agenda. This was not reliable. Children were intimidated, so they couldn't read well at that point in time. There were various sort of counter narratives that came at that point. But you're not going to be able to change much if there is such a large variation in the data sources. And therefore, the problem statement at that point was, how do we make sure that we collect data that is reliable but also is a government source. And that's when, a visionary bureaucrat proposed the idea of an internal evaluation wing. So this is a wing that is set up within the education department of about 100 teachers on deputation. There are external consultants who conduct video and audio um, evaluations of children. So every school in Tamil Nadu, almost every school has a sort of a, what do you call, the lab, right? IT lab. So children are brought to the lab and they are live tested on very, very simple literacy and numeracy numbers, numeracy tests. And that number got discussed every month in review meetings at the state level, district level, block level, not to penalize. The mandate was do not take a, sort of an aggressive approach with teachers, but discuss it in a productive way that changes behavior and incentivizes. They started incentivizing not growth in outcomes, but actual closing of the reliability gap. So you actually started rewarding teachers for reporting reliable data. And that's where it stood last year. We're probably the only organization that's celebrating a dip in learning outcomes reported, because it means that we now have a system that's getting better at giving us reliable, true data. So that's what we use now. We continue to use. As you see, teacher reported data is around 68%, and it will continue to be around that. But every other source, your non-teaching cadre, is almost identical to what we do and the third-party evaluation. This is the evaluation wing reported data. So we think it's a big win that we've got the system to and incentivize the system to, and we see that number coming down. The 68%, we see it actually coming down. Like I said, not something to celebrate, but also something for us to, um, you know, uh, be happier about at this point. And that's how we got the system to a point where evidence can be generated, but also can be used. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Merlia. For a minute, I forgot that I was playing this role as MC because it was such a thought provoking talk and I was invested fully in that. I would like to invite Muzamil as the second speaker for today's session.
Hello, this is working. Um, what My name is Muzammil. I am the founder of Project Deep. We are heavily invested in the model of direct cash transfers. What I'll do today is I'll also talk about a little bit of the space. What are direct cash transfers in most states now? 14, 15 states in India in the last 3 years, 4 years have adopted these large scale cash transfer models. Ladki Bahin Yojana, Gruha Lakshmi, Ladli Bahin, Lado Lakshmi, all of these are direct cash transfer schemes. PM Kisan, which is a central scheme. This is the space in which we are operating today. The topic of using data to influence or using data that drives change. Specifically, I had 3 to 4 points to make. One, this is happening at a large scale right now. There are large election campaigns around it. There's a lot of conversation and a lot of narrative around it right now. In all this noise and all the conversations, how do you bring a evidence-backed approach to this kind of policy making? We were seriously interested in this topic because I'll just quote some of the numbers. We did a state of the sector report, very inspired by what ASAR does every year in the country to put a status to where education in the country is. That's the first thing that Change Engine inspired us to do. And in collaboration with them, we put out a report called Unconditional Cash Transfers. These are the numbers that we quoted in the report. 2,80,000 crore, which is almost 10% of all government welfare spending in the country, are going out in the form of cash today, which is money directly going from government's bank accounts to citizens' bank accounts. This is inclusive of all schemes. There are 72 schemes that we looked upon, 40 schemes we could find budgets of. This number is 0.9% of the GDP. It has grown 23x, and 11% of all social sector spending, especially government ones. This is why we are very interested in this topic. This is the report. I will take a few snippets from the report and not talk about it entirely. It's a 126-page report. I would encourage people to read it. There's a 6-page executive summary if you're interested. There are three main questions that we were trying to address, and here from the big noise that exists today around this. One is because this is linked to election campaigns. There is a scheme Ladki Bahin usually comes up before elections, and governments start distributing cash to women. So the first question was, are these only politically motivated? Are they only helping the vote bank? Or is this welfare? There were articles written very clearly talking about cash is not welfare at all. When we got interested in this topic, we got interested 3 to 4 years ago. Me and my co-founder Pankhuri, both of us got promoted in our own respective organizations and wanted to donate a little bit money that we had. We were very inspired by the work Give Directly had done, which is a US-based organization, has worked in Africa for 10 years, have gathered more than 300 RCTs from around the globe that cash transfers really work to alleviate poverty. That is when we got interested in the topic before governments had started adopting it. So we knew that there is evidence that exists that cash transfers work to alleviate poverty. So this is a very legitimate form of welfare that can be scaled very easily, which we saw, 23x growth. That's when we got interested. Now to answer this question, we had to look back as to what happened in India. The scale up is fast, so it seems like in the last 2-3 years, everybody ramped up to it. But it took a lot of time for us as a country to get here, which we wanted to highlight in the report. 2007, there was a big problem statement in the country that it takes 3 rupees to deliver 1 rupee of ration. This was a very popular problem statement back then. And in response to that, an entire DBT mechanism was set up, which is your Aadhaar, mobile banking, Jan Dhan accounts, to counter the administrative inefficiency that we had in the system. So the thought had started back in 2007. That was the administrative efficiency, that was the motivation for this. In 2018, Raitu Bandhu was one of the schemes that came up in Telangana, which was farmer targeted. They were the first state to do a universal to all farmers essentially, no matter if you have 100 acres of land or 5 acres of land. They were the first ones to say every farmer will get money just before the sowing season. That model was so successful that it immediately got picked up by the central government, which is in the form and shape of PM Kisan today. So that's the response to agrarian crisis, which was also looming around the country in 2018. And in 2019 onwards, in the last few years, what we have seen is women-focused cash transfers in the country. So it took a long journey for us to come here. There were different motivations that helped this, and there was results that was observed on the journey. This was a response to the question, are these only politically motivated? There's the answer that we have is yes, it has a political patronage attached to it, but it is for welfare, is the first thing we wanted to influence or build that narrative for the space. The second question that we have is, there have been a lot of advocates around the world for the idea of universal basic income, which is no matter if you're the richest person in the country or the poorest person, everybody should get a basic income because money is used for survival and existence. But the question forever has been, where will this money come from? Who will fund this? Part of this answer is we are already funding 2,80,000 crores, which is a large amount that we are funding. The second important response, and we went back to when economists in the country were really promoting cash transfers for India. In 2016-17, in the economic survey, there was an entire chapter written which was called an entire chapter on UBI. It was called, I forgot the name, but would Gandhi be for or against UBI was, I'm paraphrasing the name of the chapter. One of the key suggestions in that chapter was that the money should come from existing subsidies. And going back to the point of inefficiencies in the system, LPG was the first subsidy that was moved to a DBT mechanism. The country saved 74,000 crores when they moved it to DBT mechanism. I'm quoting a lot of macro data to to what to essentially say that the overall narrative or the overall picture has important questions attached to where we are as a country and what we are doing with our welfare as the welfare evolves, uh, and trying to back it with some data that there is meaning and purpose behind with good intent, um, alongside different agendas that also exist. The last question, and the most important one: do cash transfers really work? Okay, we have the money, or we will find the money from the right spaces. Um, this is already happening and it's good for welfare, but do they really, in India, do they really work? In US right now, just to take a reference point, there are 150 pilots going on across the US. There are 11 institutes, one of which is University of Pennsylvania, that has a basic income lab within the university. And they are assessing 40 of these pilots, doing M&E, both short-term, long-term, to understand what designs really work, at what frequency, what amount, what communication, what timing does these cash transfers really help people to get out of poverty. In India, the government, our government is the largest, by the way. No, but no other country, South Korea probably is in competition, but no other country is doing this large amount of cash transfers in the world. We don't have a single institute or an organization right now focused on assessing the impact of cash transfers, and that is what we wanted to drive in the country. That is what we wanted to build it out. So the last point, this is evidence from our pilots that we have done in the past 3 years. We have reached out to 800 families and provided 65,000. The next slide is more important, where we are trying to gather a similar evidence from the emerging evidence in the country, where other organizations like Indus Action, King's College London, Dr. Karthik Muralidharan, and others have also been trying to understand how this works and for what benefits. And the emerging evidence does suggest that it works to a great extent. These were the three main questions that we were trying to answer, and some of the macro data that we are gathering and would continue to gather uh, tries to answer some of the main questions in the space. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Muzamil. Next, I would like to invite our speaker, Pooja Sharma Goel.
Thank you so much. It's great to be here. Thank you. It was very inspiring to hear your story and the numbers. I've been given to understand that most of the people in the room are founders looking to build, are building, or scale their not-for-profits. Is that true? Raise of hands. Is everybody looking to scale their foundation, not-for-profit? Everybody? Okay, great. So before I start on the data and evidence that we are generating at Udaiti, I just want to give a personal anecdote. Before I joined the social sector, I was in the private sector for almost 28 years, and I built 3 startups. One went nowhere, second one got acquired, and the third one is still running and growing quite a bit. Both last 2 were in education space. And my instinct as an entrepreneur always was look at the problem and then jump right into solve. And you start solving, and gradually it'll grow bigger. And as now I have transitioned to Udaiti and thinking about how to solve for women's workforce participation in the country at scale, there has been one big shift in my thinking, which is that when you are thinking about solving for a problem at scale, it requires a completely different approach. At least for me, it did not work where you say you start small, start solving, it'll grow. And I saw that in your story you were able to do that. But a lot of the time when you're thinking scale, those design principles have to be baked in right up front. And therefore that ambition is very important, and that's why I asked the question. Um, at Udaiti, I can give two examples, one on the government side, another one on the private sector side. What would everyone prefer? Just a show of hands. For government, private sector, I have 7 minutes. So I'll talk about the private sector work. Um, World Economic Forum publishes something called the Global Gender Gap Index every year, 148 countries. India has consistently been in the last 10% of the countries. Last year we were at 131. This, of course, has been noticed. This has become a big area of priority, both for the government and for the private sector, for good reason, that we really need to increase women's participation in the workforce. Now, when it comes to any gender-based topic, these are very deeply rooted, you know, everybody has a perspective on it. And all of us see one part of the elephant based on where we have been, what gender we are, what echo chamber we belong to. So it becomes even more difficult to get to certain baseline, and therefore data plays a big role. When we are thinking about the economic growth of the country, we are talking about becoming the third largest economy, getting to 5 trillion or $10 trillion. It's very clear that you cannot do that with uh, suboptimal talent allocation. If we are a system, the problem is that there is a large talent pool sitting which is not able to contribute to the economy. Because of structural barriers, we need to remove it, but getting to baseline is very, very hard there. So how do we look at data there, especially in the private sector? When we look around, we feel like, yeah, but like, you know, there are more women studying, more women graduating, सारे जो benefits हैं वो women के लिए होते हैं. There are enough women in the workforce. Why do we even need to do anything now? It's only when you look at the data that you begin to see what's happening. So we were trying to see, where do we get that data from? How do you understand? There is, of course, government does the PLFS, and you can do the female labor force participation rate, which has gone up from 27% to 37 to now 41%. But when you peel the onion, what you see is that all of that growth has been in rural and self-employment. And so a lot of informal work is being done by women. But when you look at women in the formal workforce, what you see is it is still at 18%. So part of it is that data from PLFS, but in the private sector, we were looking for data sources, and we realized that all NSC listed companies, publicly listed companies, need to report their gender data in their annual reports and BRSR reports. So the largest of Indian companies are reporting that data, but it is sitting in silos. We can't do anything with it. So at Udaiti, in order to understand where the big barriers and what were the big levers that could move the system, we said, let's create a baseline, and that's our Close the Gender Gap Data Hub. It's available on our website. We've been publishing it every year. This is the 5th year data that we've basically taken all those annual report data, which is essentially audited data by the government, by the private sector companies. And essentially what you see, if you could just scroll down, is women representation in a formal workforce overall is still at 18% over 5 years. Even though when you look at FLFPR, it has gone from 25 to 42. But formal workforce is at 18%. If you could just click on women in board of directors there. That number has increased because of a policy intervention that every public company needs an independent woman director. So that number has gone from 18% to 22%. And women in key management positions, that's women in leadership, that's even more abysmal because that number 19%, it actually went down slightly, jumping up at 18%. So 5 years, we're still very static. So that is the baseline. Now, going from there, we can get to sector level views. And in fact, you can look at any company's data. So if you could just scroll up, please, and further up, please. Sector snapshot. Now, what you could do is look at any company, any sector here, auto and automobile and auto components. You will see NSC listed. You could just leave that. You could just leave that. 126 NSC listed companies. There are 921,000 employees and only 140,000 women workforce. If you just come down, this is the representation across 23 sectors. So in auto, only 15% women are there. Because, again, if we are not looking at data, we can say, see, like hospitals, all women, right? Now, if you dig in deeper, you see, yes, all women, and it's the highest performing sector with 48% women there. But when you look at women in leadership, that number again drops down. So it's all nurses. But then you see the long tail of sectors where there are 2%, 3%, 4% women. And based on this data now, we are planning different interventions for each sectors. There are some things that are emerging across the sectors, which are things like women in manufacturing. There are overall only 11% women in manufacturing. That would be large volumes that we could target. Women in sales, large volumes that we could target, very, very low numbers. Women in leadership, the numbers will be very low, but the impact will be very high in terms of decision making. So across sectors, we can do that, and then we can go deep into one of few sectors, like a pharma sector has its own nuances. And therefore, there now, based on this data, we are building evidence in pharma sector to say, look, here are the big barriers on the demand side, on the supply side, and this is what we can do. So I think if you are thinking about or building already your not-for-profit startups, foundations, organizations, and thinking about scale, building this evidence, which is data-backed, and data tells one side of the story, and there is another side of the evidence, which is from the lived experience on the ground, which could be done through pilots, through case studies. If an organization has done it really well, studying that, and it can be very, as I can tell you as an entrepreneur at heart, it can be very frustrating in the beginning. It's like, doing all of that work and you're not seeing the results. But in order to be able to successfully and effectively reach at scale, this background work of creating the data, creating the evidence, creating some of those numbers, like the number that you talked about, very large number, everybody then, pays attention to it. And with that, then you can drive the conversation and solutioning forward at scale. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Pooja. I would like to invite our next speaker, Arundhati Gupta.
Thank you. And it really is such a fascinating cross section of talks on the same sort of topic of evidence, right? I'm Arundhati. I'm the founder and CEO of Mentor Together. And for this particular talk, I thought I'll speak a little bit of the life cycle of evidence. I think evidence in itself has a sort of life stage it goes through, right? And I think the lens that I'd like to apply is really the sense of what does evidence look like. I think in a very intuitive sense, the journey it took for us is it went from idea to program to a system. And what did evidence mean in these different stages? And I think, again, like Pooja also mentioned, I think the audience is a lot of founders. I think I'd say that one is the progression of this from an idea to a program to a system. The second is often a personal journey that you're taking on as a founder yourself, right? And I saw that at the idea level, it's often driven, or it matters a lot, the evidence to the founder. At the program level, the evidence matters a lot to the organization. And at the system level, the evidence matters a lot to the broader field, right? That's the journey at least it took for us. So I think moving on to, and Mentor Together focuses on how mentorship as a life experience, as a specific facilitated experience, can be provided to young people who are in different backgrounds of social and economic disadvantage. And that experience of mentorship is then what we try to provide to facilitate other kinds of change outcomes, positive outcomes for young people. At the very beginning, it was just an idea. And at that time, evidence was almost towards sometimes confirming that sort of intuitive belief with which founders often set up something, right? I was the beneficiary of mentorship and found that incredibly catalytic in my life and thought, instinctively, this should be paid forward, this should become a program, this should be something that many more young people can access. At that time, and it was an idea that was intuitively resonant, but had very little formal structure to it, even in my mind. And most of the evidence that I had to generate for myself, and then in a way for external audiences, was first even the unit of like, what is the theory of change? When mentoring works, if it's formally provided, how will it work, right? And so again, that's a lot of things that most of us will do at the time of starting off an organization, but developing that very basic fundamental unit of a theory of change. I think at the idea level also this, I think, taking from economics, the sense of a unit economics, right? What does it cost to do 1 unit of something? At the idea level, it was often breaking it down to unit impact, right? If one mentoring relationship works, when does it work? What makes it work? What are the mechanisms of it, right? Can one theorize and say that if a mentor is provided to a mentee, they do XYZ, and XYZ will then translate to this broader impact? So we just focus, and I focused a lot on that unit impact of theorizing why mentoring works. A lot of what we built as evidence then was very qualitative. At that initial, because you're not really aiming at large. I remember our first few pilots were with like 20 people, right? What we did, because we were trying to build that unit story of why does mentoring work, we invested a lot in qualitative research, very deep qualitative research. Almost all our initial work was published as papers in conjunction with the Center for Public Policy at IIM Bangalore. So that sort of gave a little bit more validity to this very deep work trying to theorize why does mentoring work at a single unit. And I think that was very important at the idea level, because in a way, it also convinced me that this is an idea worth pursuing, because in those first 2-3 years of most entrepreneurial journeys, you have like 1 foot in and then 1 foot out, right? You're not sure if this will gain traction for you as an org and also for yourself personally. And so in those first 3 years, I think spending time on this, on the evidence for the idea, really convinced me and built a little body of evidence that then took it to the program level, right? So I think at the program level, of course, at the most simplistic sense, it's a collection of those units, right? You define a program, for example, a school-based mentoring program that provides high-risk youth access to a mentor to drive better school engagement, better social emotional well-being, right? The evidence moved from saying, does this work at the unit level, to then, does this work reliably when more people come into the system, right? Can it work if there are 200? What's the way this program will now reliably function at that unit at a greater scale? So numbers definitely came into the picture. I think the other thing that was very important towards driving evidence was some amount of standardization of process, because that became important towards saying what is going to potentially work to make things reliable, right, at a bigger unit of scale. So again, within the scope of what we did, again, in the first sort of, in this phase of running programs, a lot of focus in the first 3 years was in doing evidence that was within the control of the program, collecting pre and post, quasi-experimental, nothing that we could prove in an attributional sense, but at least show that if 200 mentorships happen, if 1,000 mentorships happen, this is what we are seeing as difference, right? We spent about 3 years in the program stage doing just that kind of evidence collection. After that, we moved on to the more, like Merlia said, the more sort of independent RCT-based evidence that could then show that there is a way you can attribute it, right? That mentoring works because we can show that if it's in the absence of mentoring, all of these things don't happen. So at the program stage, we went from doing that more within the program control type of evidence to then more independent work as well. Um, and I think here again, the idea is that this sort of evidence, I think, mattered a lot to the organization to mentor together then, to establish its credibility, right? Because we were able to then start demonstrating that programs of mentorship work. And again, I think in our journey, it was linear, but I think you can enter this space at any point, right? Sometimes you have a field already developed and you have to enter at the point of evidence. Not, you don't need to prove evidence for the idea, etc. For us, it so happened that mentoring being such a new idea that we had to start from that level. So I do want to caveat that you don't always have to start from idea and then only program. The stage we find ourselves in right now is at the level of a system, right? Where we're trying to think of what is the evidence that can prove that mentoring works, especially in large systems that are providing some sorts of support to young people, where if you can layer mentoring into that, it serves the larger goal of those systems. Again, the stakeholder in mind here now is the bigger field, right? Who is interested in mentoring? How can we make mentoring something that they consider as important? What evidence would convince them that they should, whether it's a school, whether it's a nonprofit, whether it's a corporate, whether it's a government, for the field at large, how does one create evidence to make them invest in this? And I think that it took, again, different shapes for us because I would say the focus for us as an organization in the field building space has been maybe only of the last 3 years. Things that made a difference for us was often getting things like a policy brief published, again, by an independent party that laid out our vision of a system of mentoring. That proved to be very catalytic because we could say that for this field of mentoring, here's a vision document. We started doing a lot of what this event is, right? Field building, dispersion of knowledge, because again, at this level of a field, evidence is never going to be one thing you prove and X will happen, right? You're trying to do it in so many different ways, inspire, catalyze, motivate people. So events like a mentoring summit that now we organize that just allows the field to come together and think of evidence in a way that will drive it for whatever is their action, right? Can a corporate believe in mentoring enough to do employee volunteering? Can a school believe in it enough to do that? So a lot of field building events have also helped in driving evidence at the time at the system level. Again, at this level of how is mentoring actually being received, it's often happening through government systems. Either the mentoring sits within an existing policy, or, for example, can in the Pradhan Mantri Viksit Bharat Rozgar Yojana, which is trying to support first-time job entrants and help them stay on in a job, can mentoring be a supportive layer? So at the system level, definitely it's no longer a single program that an organization is running, but something that's being institutionalized for delivery within government systems. I think the change that I've also seen is that, of course, evidence comes into the conversation right from the start, because it's almost the opportunity of having access to so many, being a part of a government system means you have the opportunity to directly access so many people. So it's almost like you don't want to lose that in a couple of years' time. You absolutely want to be able to say, this is what this mentoring program did, right? I think we're still figuring it out because it seems like some of the more technical ways, like can you randomize and others, don't often fall within the purview of how government systems can work. But we're still trying to say, can we at least prove that here there is evidence that mentoring matters to bigger policy priorities? If you're thinking job retention for first-time job entrants, please do mentoring because this evidence is there, right? How we'll go about proving it, probably talk to me 2 years from now. Hopefully I'll have better answers. But broadly, that's been the journey for us of evidence from an idea, which was very important for me as a founder, to evidence for a program that mattered to the credibility of an organization, to evidence now for a system that matters to, I think, a larger field of actors interested in the space of mentoring. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Arundhati. Now we will be having a question and answer round. So if anybody would like to ask any questions.
You're creating. I have a question from Arundhati. So, you talked about sanitization of process in mentorship part and the models and stuff like that. I want to understand when you do mentorship in the education space, be it at university level or at school level. I guess you guys are doing it more at school level. So I just want to understand how you bring the seriousness among the student, because awareness is one challenge. It's easy to get mentor, but how to involve them when you say sanitization of process? What are the processes you have established so that that mentorship hygiene stays in place and the student get the best out of it? That is something at least I struggle to establish while working with the education ecosystem.
Yeah, I'm wondering if we should take that offline in the, because it's not it's a very specific to the mentoring program, right? And not may not have enough takeaways for a broader topic on evidence, but happy to chat more on that. I think just one brief response to this, and I'll pass the mic in, is that I think maybe a strategic way to look at it, if not the organic way of like building it for yourself and is probably to decide where, for the problem you're solving for, where is the sector now, and maybe what's important to prove as evidence. I think that I see that in the story, that in terms of cash transfers especially, right, you come into a sector, things have happened. If you can identify the vantage point where you can contribute, like, do I need to prove XYZ to take the conversation ahead? That could be one way, especially if you're thinking of, I need to prove in a way my organization has a role to play in this that would sustain us. Then maybe start from where there is, white space. What And I feel that's also something that Udaiti did so well, right? There are all these hundreds of reports that NSE BSE is mandating, but no one has analyzed and made a database based on that. So that's a great like white space to solve for. So I think that way evidence can be very strategically generated if you're starting something.
So I'd like to make 2 points. One is, whenever you are starting something new, you're looking for your first job, you are starting your first startup, you are, whether it is for profit, not for profit, right? You are the big brand. You will have to find the initial set of supporters who believe in you, because your organization, you are really front and center. So whoever is coming in to support you from a capital perspective will be essentially investing in you. And so in the initial stages, it's always going to be you as a brand and your initial set of supporters who know that you will figure it out. You will pivot, you will shift, you will do whatever it takes, but you deeply believe in it and you have the skills and the competencies to make it work, right? So that is one. The second is, it especially in not for profit, it is even harder where the problem is harder. When, for example, and I used to feel the same way when I was looking for a job or going to pitch to an investor, they would make product market fit to hua nahi hai matlab, you need to have product market fit, you need to reach certain MRR ARR to make it happen, right? Uske liye to you need funding also. But the second point is, I'll reiterate what I said earlier, which is how you structure your initial part of the solution, the product market fit, the solution that to the problem that you're trying to solve. Uh, it will have to have certain design principles. And if you are trying to solve it for scale, then those design principles have to be baked in then. And that evidence generation mindset has to be baked in during the course of your early pilots, early journey, early solutioning.
No, absolutely. I think 100% agree with the part about you being the brand. And it would help to build some credibility in sort of the domain or the sector that you want to pursue for a couple of years, because that also helps you sort of build that network, for the lack of a better word, find godparents who would, I don't want to say godfathers, but who would really, believe in you, believe in your idea. I've always been told in the initial years that funders don't necessarily fund the idea, they fund the founder, right? It's the trust in the founder's vision that funders fund. But also, I think along the way, especially in education where outcomes take much longer to see, there are intermediate sort of milestones that you can bake into your design that can sort of inspire confidence that things are working. Outcomes come much later, but for example, in our case, if you're designing, say, lesson plans for teachers or handbooks for teachers, is there a habit that's setting in among teachers to be using it, right? So if you have data, not of the outcomes, which might take longer, but sort of the stickiness of your idea and habit formation that your sort of idea is creating, then that sort of inspires confidence, and over a period of time you get by. I mean, you're never fully a resource to a point where you're absolutely you have everything that you need, but it helps you get by till the point where you have empirical evidence at the end of it to go big.
Thank you, everyone. Can we have a huge round of applause for all our speakers today?